Hello and welcome everybody to my presentation, The Villain Sidekick, Bellatrix Lestrange in the Harry Potter series. Thank you so much to the HPAC team for having me and for organizing this conference. Now, the Oxford English Dictionary defines the sidekick as a partner in crime, or either alternatively or simultaneously as a subordinate member of a pair or a group, which often translates into iconic duos, intricately layered partnerships, or quite simply interesting work or personal relationships between two or sometimes more characters. Popular literature is full of enigmatic hero-sidekick constellations. Be it Frodo and Sam, Shrek and Donkey, Sherlock and Watson, or, well, Harry, Ron and Hermione. These constellations pull us in, make us laugh, make us emotional, and often help us understand the hero figure just a little bit more, or occasionally a lot. Often, the sidekicks are even more popular than the actual hero. But what about the other end of the coin? What about the darker side of these works? What about the villain and their sidekick? While the classic sidekick figure in popular literature and culture has received ample attention in the academic criticism of the last decade, the respective villain sidekicks have so far been largely neglected. This study will home in on this research gap by moving away from the prototypical dominating hero-sidekick constellation and instead shift its focus onto the villain sidekick. Now, in the Harry Potter series, there are definitely a few contenders for this position, but this talk will focus on one in particular, Voldemort's lieutenant, Bellatrix Lestrange. In so doing, it will read Bellatrix as abject sidekick at the intersection of gender, political, and monster discourse, suggesting a highly visual and excessive portrayal during the novels and films as a semiotic, Carnivalesque spectacle of transgression. Thus, this study will posit Bella as a darker twist on the prototypical sidekick figure, suggesting this character as an important discursive tool to explore lingering gender bias, aspects of political subversion, as well as the highly problematic nature of the relationship between villain and sidekick. Contrary to many other prototypical sidekick figures, Bella is introduced relatively late during the series, only in the fourth novel. However, even there, she features only in a very brief snapshot, which may hint that she might possibly become more relevant in the future, yet does not reveal her full significance. In this brief snippet of past Death Eater trials, we are introduced to a past version of Bella, awaiting her trial for the torture and permanent incapacitation of Frank and Alice Longbottom, basically introducing her as synonymous with the gruesome crime that she has committed. Sitting in the chained chair as though it were a throne, Bella appears to embrace her trial with striking composure, and most importantly, pride. To her, the grueling prospect of a life sentence Azkaban does not hold terror, but instead seems to be the ultimate sacrifice that she's making for her master. Thus, this initial glimpse of Bella highlights something that will become only too prominent over the course of the series, that she defines her identity and very being via her service for Voldemort. While she is, at this point, merely characterized as one of his Death Eaters, her full status as a sidekick is unveiled only later on, a narrative development that ties in with the sidekick as a concept. According to Ron Buchanan, this figure often marks a passage or a shift, as does Bellatrix's introduction, which goes hand in hand with a distinct turn towards a much darker, much more threatening atmosphere, and, quite literally, Voldemort's return. Furthermore, it highlights her previously demonstrated loyalty as her attempt to fulfill the sidekick's function as loyal companion, remaining at the hero's side during whatever quest that they are on. Bella attempts to do that very thing, yet she, in contrast to many other sidekicks, fails to do so. She's not by his side to prevent his downfall. She's unable to find him and prevent it from further search, and then only gets to rejoin him much later. Instead, she attempts to shift the spatial presence to a mental, representative, and linguistic level, suggesting closeness through her unwavering loyalty and support. Especially interesting in these early scenes is Bella's immediate effect on Harry, here metaphorically representing the wider wizarding community. After this first initial snapshot that he got of her, from the safe, remote vantage point of, well, the future, seeing her name again unsuspectedly on the Black family tapestry in Grimmauld Place causes an immediate physical sensation. Lestrange, Harry said aloud. The name had stirred something in his memory. He knew it from somewhere, but for a moment he couldn't think where, though it gave him an odd, creeping sensation in his stomach. The narrative's emphasis on this odd, creeping sensation, as well as the seemingly almost repressed, yet still present memory of Bella, is highly significant here, as is the narrative choice to opt for language that links the scene to the workings of trauma, both Harry's personal trauma, through Bellatrix's connection to Voldemort, as well as that of his classmate Neville, and, on a wider scale, the wider trauma of the Wizarding World. This is one of the first hints that Bella is no common Death Eater, not just one among many, but holds a special position within the narrative. Thus, she is from the very start painted as a monstrous entity, monstrous in her past actions, yet also in her effect on the present. And she's also foreshadowed as yet another monstrous enemy that Harry will inevitably have to face in the future. She's hence cast as something that, similar to trauma itself, has quite literally been locked away, yet that still commands a haunting presence in people's minds. A haunting presence that will only too soon after reclaim its power as an active, threatening force. Her official active entrance into the current timeline clearly attests to that, and exhibits her monstrosity in all of its intricate layers. Striking, first and foremost, is the narrative's emphasis on her marginal, yet through that, special, status as the one woman among the Death Eaters. While other women will later on rejoin the ranks, Bellatrix is the only woman Death Eater mentioned in Goblet of Fire and Order of the Phoenix. And consequently, she draws attention, as demonstrated, for example, by Harry's reaction to the Daily Prophet article. His eyes are drawn to the picture of the witch, whose face had leaped out at him the moment that he had seen the page, the only woman among the 10, a unique position that may hint either at her exceptional skills and or a unique depravity, going against everything that the Harry Potter series cherishes in a woman. This portrayal continues throughout the rest of the series, investing her with countless antitheses to the traits, attributes, and behavior that gender discourse has over centuries designated as typically, and more importantly, even intrinsically female. This begins on an auditive level. In contrast to the stereotypically soft, soothing female voice that features so often in literature, Bellatrix enters the scene with raucous screams, shrieks, cackles, and quasi-animalistic snarls. Overall, her harsh female voice, a description that in itself seems a deliberate paradox, contrasts interestingly with fellow male Death Eater Lucius's soft one. Furthermore, Bella deliberately employs her voice to mock what gender discourse has long designated as woman's central function, motherhood, via a horrible mock baby voice, turning this cherished concept, one that holds particular reverence during the Harry Potter series, into a twisted, grotesque parody. This is further emphasized by her behavior, exhibiting a complete lack of empathy and maternal feelings. While it should be mentioned that this distinctly black and white portrayal of Bellatrix's negation of motherhood has recently been complicated by The Cursed Child, this talk focuses only on the original 7 Harry Potter novels, during which Bellatrix's portrayal never ventures beyond this category. However, this is only one facet among many. Bella's entire behavior renders her monstrous. She seems synonymous with death, chaos, cruelty, and an explicit joy in inflicting it. A presentation that is in direct contrast with the series' sacrificial mothers. In fact, the narrative even suggests that the very thought of torture appears to arouse her chest rising and falling rapidly despite standing still, looking alive with excitement. As she outlines later on, her success at performing in particular the unforgivable curses derives from the fact that she really wants to cause pain and enjoys it. Despite all the atrocities that Bella commits, however, it is significant that she is only one monster among many, and while she may hold a special position among them, she still remains subservient, only a sidekick to the series' villain. Now, we all like a good villain origin story. However, the Harry Potter series leaves the background of Bellatrix and Voldemort's connection curiously open, and thus invites the readers to fill in the blank using their own imagination, a fact that has inspired many fan fictions, TikTok series, and cosplays, and which has helped render Bella even more of a mystery. What we do get, however, is the aftermath, Bellatrix's status as Voldemort's sidekick. Here, it is significant to note, however, that this is an impression that Bella mostly creates herself. She proudly presents herself as his confidant, one of the key functions of sidekicks. She claims that he shares everything with her, painting herself as his most trusted advisor, in addition to one of his fiercest warriors. Here, it is important to note, however, that much of this special status that she suggests having is often contested, for example by Snape. This discrepancy, however, may not be a simple delusion on Bella's part, but rather an expert manipulation by Voldemort, a deliberate method to give her that precise impression in order to bind her to him, possibly cunningly exploiting a certain craving for validation on Bella's part. This aspect of emotional manipulation also fits Voldemort's rule over the Death Eaters. Throughout the narrative, the readers witness numerous displays of disciplinary techniques ranging from physical coercion, aka torture, to psychological manipulation. In fact, Voldemort's regime of power appears strongly reminiscent of what Althusser describes as ideological and repressive state apparatuses. As is suggested by Bella's case, additional previously existing ideological state apparatus-like structures, like, in this case, Bella's family, already paved the way for his system control. Althusser defines an ideological state apparatus as a mechanism to establish and maintain a particular ideology, here the superiority of pluriplots, an ideology that is even ingrained in the Black family motto, toujours pur. As Bella's cousin Sirius outlines, this very mindset would have been ingrained in every member of House Black from childhood onwards, and its upholding carefully policed. Bella, it is implied, would have been raised in this precise environment, repressive and ideologically fraught, smoothing the path for Voldemort's later interpellation. The moment when an individual recognizes themselves as part of a particular ideology and then consequently assumes a position that aligns with its prescribed social roles and expectations. Thus, enticed by the familiarity of Voldemort's pure plot preachings, Bella would have naturally gravitated towards his ranks. Once incorporated then within his group of followers, Voldemort, the narrative suggests, enforces his power over them via ideological, repressive, and disciplinary means, as well as a seemingly panoptic apparatus of surveillance. Hinging upon a sense of constant surveillance, panoptic structure enforces rigorous self-policing at all time, as the people in question have internalized the moralizing gaze of authority and adjust their behavior accordingly. I suggest that the same principle is at work with the Death Eaters, as can be witnessed by Bella's behavior during the Ministry attack in Order of the Phoenix. Realizing that they have failed a mission, the reader witnesses one of the only instances that Bella appears truly scared, as evidenced by the fear in her voice. This is immediately followed by Bellatrix's highly enigmatic appeal to Voldemort via the scream, "Master, I tried, do not punish me," seemingly pleading into the void. While the narrative leaves it open whether or not she was at this point already somehow aware that he was nearby. This moment definitely does suggest that, even when he's not, she has internalized his disciplining gaze. It is always with her. In fact, this lends a completely new dimension to her attempts to find him, even after his apparent destruction, and to her behavior during the trial, suggesting that this internalized surveillance is strong enough to even police her in his absence. Therefore, Bella as a sidekick figure serves to exemplify the workings of Voldemort's disciplinary methods and how deeply they are rooted within the consciousness of his followers, especially those closest to him. While Bella, as a descendant of the Black family, is, to quote Sirius, practically royalty, and suggested to be a particularly gifted witch, she never characterizes herself as anything but Voldemort's most loyal servant, readily subjugating herself. This aligns with many fellow sidekick figures, as they often are servants. In fact, many hero-sidekick relationships are characterized by an asymmetrical power distribution, and this villain-sidekick relationship is no exception to that. This depiction is reinforced by agenda biases that's seemingly inherent to the narrative. Despite her considerable skill, Bella is incapacitated right before the climax in every fight, pinned by a statue in Order of the Phoenix, and actually killed during the Battle of Hogwarts, always leaving Voldemort free to face his opponents on his own, all lights on him and his power. This feeds into the narrative's general impression that, both in battle as well as in daily life, Bella remains Voldemort's inferior, a sidekick, rather than an equal, a boundary that she never even attempts to push. Their entire relationship as villain and sidekick is highly asymmetrical, which is not atypical for sidekick constellations. Often, the sidekick figure has, to quote Anne Cameron, very little voice and very little choice. While Bella definitely does have a voice, and she's not shy to use it with everyone else, Cameron's description is reflective of her interactions with Voldemort, We often witness him cutting her off, telling her to be quiet. He dominates the conversations, while she is mostly only a passive recipient, even when she does speak. The same also applies to the aspect of choice. While overall we do get a superficial impression of Bella as strong and stubborn, her impulses and the choices that might compel her to make are always checked by Voldemort, or by proxy, one of his Death Eaters. Her behavior, however, often suggests that, unchecked, she would have acted quite differently. Another facet of many sidekick figures is that they often function as a kind of substitute family. Now, this is never made fully explicit throughout the series, but there is the occasional hint that, at least on Bella's side, there might be an emotional or possibly even a physical component to their relationship. The only affection we ever see from Bella, aside from her sister Narcissa, is not for her husband, but only for Voldemort, which has led to a lot of speculation. Speculations that the cursed child then later took her by the suggestion that they actually had a child together. This interpretation would, in fact, enable a reading of Bella and the little union of three as a substitute for family. However, here once again there is a question of arguable emotional reciprocity. An integral fact of Bella's portrayal is a constant self-fashioning as spectacle of chaos, violence, and transgressive femininity. While this is also present in the books, Helena Bonham Carter's brilliant acting in the films definitely does take this to another level. Every single one of Bella's movements, facial expressions, and sounds hinges on excess and is always highly exaggerated, artificial, and bordering on the grotesque. This representation, I argue, aligns Bella with Michail Bakhtin's concept of the Carnivalesque, rendering her a Carnivalesque spectacle of transgression. The subversive spirit of Carnival, during which societal norms are temporarily overturned or suspended, provides fictional transgressive characters like Bella with a platform to challenge power structures and mock authority, as well as provide a counter-image to many established concepts. While the Carnivalesque's ambivalent joy and humor appears at first glance to tie in very well with the sidekick's frequent function as comic relief, its representation here takes quite a different approach. It instead provides the reader with an inverted negative Carnivalesque that veers into the grotesque, cruel, and abject, transforming comic relief into horror. This becomes most evident via Bella's iconic laughter. As Bakhtin outlines, the Carnivalesque hinges on liberation through laughter. Thus, laughter is a regenerative, liberating force, which creates space for individuals to mock authority and challenge norms. Laughter is hence employed in a playful manner to question the status quo and, potentially, inspire a change for the better. While definitely mocking authority and challenging norms, Bella's laughter is not playful, not joyful. On the contrary, it is cutting, high-pitched, exaggerated, and above all, grotesque. It is this laughter that accompanies Bella's entry in the films. Not featuring her trial, the viewer's first glimpse of Bella is her realization that she's free to leave Azkaban, provoking her to burst into gales of triumphant laughter. A laughter that is chilling, seems to penetrate right to the viewer's bones, and appears to echo long after the scene has moved on. It introduces her as a figure that should produce laughter, but instead provokes only horror. Thus, while humor is usually employed in the Carnivalesque to relieve tension, this twisted version instead creates it, and already hints at the cruelty behind the laughter. Featuring into this is Bella's horrible mock baby voice, which I suggest as a form of Carnivalesque speech. Carnivalesque speech usually imitates the styles of high culture, as Bella does in this instance, yet does so from a position of debasement. It thus resists, exaggerates, and destabilizes the distinctions and boundaries that mark and maintain high culture. This, precisely, is what Bella is doing here. She snubs her nose at what society expects a woman to be like, and twists and perverts this image before releasing it in fits of recombination, mockery, and degradation, yet without offering a productive counter-image, leaving only horror. Thus, while Bella's play in the Carnivalesque does allow her, as the marginal subversive entity, a voice, this voice is then immediately revealed as dangerous, and thus needs to be eradicated. Hence, while the Carnivalesque in the Bakhtinian sense usually is a structured play of disorder, where subversion and parody allow us to glimpse alternative and possibly improved realities, it has the opposite effect in the villain's sidekick. Here it also does show us an alternative to the status quo, Yeah, this alternative is nothing but a nightmare image. Therefore, it instead serves to reaffirm the moral superiority of the rule system that is currently in place. While this is, fortunately, not true for all of our often beloved sidekick figures, we do get quite a few examples of tragic sidekicks in popular culture. Sidekicks that sacrifice themselves for the hero, a powerful and often didactic action that appeals to the audience's emotions. Bellatrix's death definitely also does invoke emotion, but possibly of a slightly different kind. Relief, possibly. A grim satisfaction. Her death, above all, is the removal of a threat, and one of the last stepping stones toward Voldemort's destruction. Nevertheless, it can be read as a psychic sacrifice. She did die fighting for the ideology that she was raised to believe and the master that she's devoted to. In her case, however, this sacrifice is a powerful testament to the havoc that dangerous ideologies can wreak. Moreover, the way that she dies in a duel with Molly Weasley, one of the epitomes of the loving mother, effects a narrative catharsis of the threat that she poses on a wider level, that of transgressive femininity, and a clear emphasis on the image of womanhood that the series suggests as ideal. While sidekick figures often forge a bridge between reader and hero, and thus serve as a mediating character that creates empathy and understanding for the hero, the villain sidekick in this case serves a contradictory function. Bella instead helps render the story's villain even more monstrous, especially via overt demonstrations of his poor treatment of those closest to him. Now, while we could of course question if Voldemort is ever really close to anyone, except for maybe Nagini, the Death Eaters are probably the closest thing that he has. Yet, even this relationship is frayed with abuse in the guise of disciplinary measures. While we never get an overt display of Voldemort physically abusing Bella, her behavior still speaks volumes. Her terror at not fulfilling a mission suggests that she is fully aware of the consequences of disappointing him. Furthermore, his interactions with Bella are always strongly reminiscent of emotional abuse, cunningly playing her like a fiddle. Thus, the abusive component to his relationship with his sidekick manages the impossible and renders an already repulsive figure even more so. Thus, to conclude, Bella presents a darker, twisted version of the prototypical sidekick figure. Significantly, it is mostly actually the sidekick herself who frames herself as such, and in doing so, plays with many of its typical functions, perverts them, and transfers them into the realm of horror and subversion. As a liminal figure per se, always just about present enough, yet never at the center, the sidekick lends itself well to this function. Even more so in Bella's case, as a thrice marginal figure, the female villain sidekick. Moreover, her link to the monstrous transforms her into an ideal tool that allows the narrative to explore a whole plethora of anxieties, both those of the fictional world as well as, on a wider level, that of the society of its time of publication. In fact, many of the issues raised by the story's villain sidekick, renegotiations of womanhood, physical and mental abuse, the danger of blindly following ideologies. All of these concerns are still very relevant even to our own time, as is the lingering gender bias that underlies the series' portrayal of women characters. All of these issues meet in its villain sidekick, rendering Bella an ideal site of cultural contestation, a figure that makes us think, ask ourselves questions, and that still appeals to our imagination even decades later, and will likely continue to do so in the future. Thank you so much for your attention, and I'm very much looking forward to your questions.